Commander Arya Malik stood on the roof of the ruined library and watched the sky. The stars were calm. The observer ships moved like slow white fish. The city below smelled of smoke and wet wood. People walked with small sacks. Children held toys made from wire and cans. Arya thought of orders and of broken rules. She had been a soldier once. Now she was a leader in a world that did not trust leaders. She kept her voice low. Her crew listened. They trusted her because she listened first. A week had passed since the observers began their tests. The first trial had broken a neighborhood. The second had changed the light and made machines die. The world learned to count losses and ration hope. But Arya saw something else. She saw people who refused to be only numbers on a screen. She saw hands that fixed things faster than the machines could break them. She saw laughter in a market when the power failed. Arya's team found a small broken probe near the river. It lay half buried in mud like a strange insect shell. Jonas, the quiet tech, lifted it with gentle hands. He had eyes that learned from old machines. He opened the probe and found tiny glass rods and wires. He found a box that pulsed with soft blue light. The probe had its own language. Jonas wanted to learn it. The team worked in the old library at night. They used candles and a solar battery they had scavenged. People came by with food. They traded stories for parts. A grandmother named Rosa brought bread and told Jonas a lullaby. She said it had been sung by her mother. The lullaby was short and soft. It had a slow rise and a fall like the tide. Jonas hummed the tune while he studied the probe. He noticed something strange. The probe's language liked patterns that rose and fell. The lullaby made the blue light blink in a way the code liked. Jonas wrote down the pattern. He did not tell Arya at once. He wanted to be sure. Arya watched the city learn new quiet ways. People tied ropes and fixed doors. They taught children to listen for strange sounds. They painted symbols on walls so helpers could find each other. The team trained small groups to send messages with old radios. They hid their plans in songs and in markets. They taught a simple rule: share when you can. Hide when you must. One night the observers tested the docks. A wave of low pressure rolled through the town by the river. Boats tipped. Nets tore. People tied themselves to poles and held until their arms burned. Samir, the old captain, drove his boat into the narrow channel and held it against the current. He would not leave his nets. He would not leave his past. When the test passed, the town was shaken and wet. People counted what they could save. Arya spoke to the crowd from a small stage of crates. She did not promise safety. She promised a way to answer. She asked for one small thing: trust a plan that the team had not told anyone. People looked at her. Some nodded. Some did not. Jonas had a plan. He brought the probe to the radio tower. He had put the lullaby into its code and added pauses like the river's breath. The pauses were odd. They made the pattern feel like a question and an answer. Jonas said the observers listened for the wrong things. He said the observers liked straight lines. People liked the lullaby because it made them remember. Arya agreed. The plan was simple and dangerous. It did not need guns. It needed patience and a steady hand. At midnight, under a thin rain, Jonas fed the lullaby into the probe and connected it to the old transmitter. The team climbed the tower. The city slept with the kind of sleep that hurts the next day. The stars looked down like blind judges. Jonas pushed the final switch. The signal went up in a thin bright thread. It spread through the wires and the old air. It mixed with the hum of the city. It sounded like a mother's voice and a clock at once. The observers' scanners blinked. In the sky, a small observer drone tilted. It had watched and learned for days. The lullaby did not make sense to its code. The pattern had music and memory mixed with odd pauses. The drone tried to read it as data. Its light stuttered. For a moment it made a small wrong move. It spun and sent a burst of light to a ship. The ship answered with calm orders. Someone on that ship frowned and marked a number on a glass screen. On the ground, the team held their breath. The drone fell away and landed in a field. It did not break. It did not explode. It sat like a quiet bird. Arya felt a small heat of triumph in her chest. It was not victory. It was the first reply. News moved fast. People came to see the fallen drone. They did not touch it. They left flowers and wire toys. The council watched the reports and wrote cautious notes. The observers sent a low message through channels no one could read. The message was short and cold. It said, "Anomaly logged." Arya knew this was only the first move. The observers would learn. They always learned fast. But so did humans. Humans learned from mistakes and from songs. The lullaby had been only a small thing. It had been a small break in a long rule. It had shown that humans could not only survive tests. They could answer them. That night people sang the lullaby in small groups. They hummed it while fixing roofs and cooking soup. The song moved quietly through the city like soft light. It was a small answer. It was a start. The river smelled of salt and wet rope when the next test began. Dawn was gray and the port looked tired. Boats sat like teeth along the pier. Nets hung like old flags. People moved slowly. They watched the water rise. Arya stood on a small hill and watched the tide come in. The observers had learned from the lullaby. They had shifted from probing minds to probing places. This time they wanted to see how people moved when the ground rolled away. Samir, the old captain, paced on the pier. He kept his hands deep in his pockets. He looked like a man who had held storms before and knew how to speak to them. His face was lined by sun and salt. He had a stubborn lean that the tide could not teach him. Jonas had worked through the night with a group of dock workers. He had tuned the foghorns. The plan was simple: use sound as a shield. The observers used pressure and tiny changes in air. Sound could confuse them if it came in the right rhythm. Jonas mixed the lullaby's pattern with the deep tones of the port horns. He taught the captains to blow in a strange code: long, short, long, pause like waves answering ashore. Leela walked through the town with a list of names. She checked on families who could not move far. She found a woman who could not leave because of a sick child. Leela stayed and held the child's hand while neighbors packed a small bundle of clothes. People offered each other things without thinking. The town had learned to be quick with kindness. At noon the first pressure wave hit. The water did not come as a single wall. It came in folds, like a new sea trying on its shape. Boats tilted. A crane groaned. People ran with buckets and ropes. The board sky was full of thin white ships that watched like strangers at a fair. The foghorns began. The sound moved across the water and into the air. It felt wrong to some ears, a rhythm too formal for honest waves. But the pattern Jonas taught them had a purpose. It made the observers' sensors check twice. Their instruments read the sound as noise. They could not tell if the town's movement was weather or message. Samir crowded his boat toward the channel where the current was strongest. He tied big nets and old planks together and drove his hull into the surge. His boat made a small wall. Men and women on the pier grabbed ropes and tied them to the nets. They pushed. They shouted. The old captain refused to leave his nets. He said the nets were a life and a promise. The port did not break. The pressure passed and the water slid away with a sigh. People cheered, but their joy was slow. They had learned the sound of loss. They had also learned the sound of small victory. Then the air split with a voice. It was clean and soft, like glass. A flat screen blinked in the square where trade notices used to hang. The hologram folded into being. It showed a face that was not quite a face: smooth features, eyes the gray of moonlight, a mouth that moved like a recording. I am the envoy, the image said. The voice was calm and curious. We do not wish harm. We wish to understand. The square was quiet. Children stopped mid-run. Someone put down a crate. The hologram's eyes seemed to look at everyone at once. It spoke in perfect sentences. It asked small kind questions about food and family. Its voice used names. It knew things about the town that had not been spoken in years. Leela felt a cold in her throat. The envoy's words were gentle but exact. It mentioned a lost sister and a song that the town had once sung to sailors. It showed a picture on the screen, an old photograph, black and white, of a young man on a boat with a crooked smile. Arya's heart dropped. She had seen that photograph in her grandmother's stories. It was a picture told to her as a child. How did the observers have it? The envoy offered safety and a clear trade. Stop resisting. Let us study openly. We will not harm those who comply. Some people listened and leaned toward the screen. The offer sounded like warmth on a cold day. A woman in the crowd wiped her face and said softly, "If they can keep my boy safe, I will." She did not finish. People glared. Trust was a shape that broke easily. Arya stepped forward. She spoke without shouting. We will not choose safety over our children's minds. We refuse tests that take our memories like things. The envoy tilted its head. It asked, why guard stories? They hinder learning. Jonas watched the screen and thought of the lullaby. Stories were not data to them. They were bones of a people. The envoy saw them as open files to read. People looked to Arya. Some faces held fear. Others held a stubborn light. Arguments started. A small group wanted to accept the envoy's offer. They thought the observers could give technology that would fix what the tests broke. A larger group feared the price. An old woman stood atop a crate and told them of a child who never returned from a test. Her voice trembled, but it held the square like a hand. Samir's boat rested in the channel. He had tied himself to the net and would not move. He stood at the pier and watched the crowd. When the town faced the envoy's promise, Samir turned his back and walked toward the water. He unhooked the net from its rope and cut a line. The boat drifted away, slow and heavy. People shouted. He drove into the current with the hull like a door. The current took the boat and pushed it into the narrow point. The boat jammed and held. The surge broke upon the boat instead of the nets. Samir's hands were full of salt and rope. He had given his vessel to save others and to prove that some things were not tradable. At dusk the envoy blinked and studied the choice on its glass. It recorded the act with odd interest and sent a note back to its ship. The observers wrote quiet lines and studied the photograph again. They had asked about memory and now they had seen defiance that used no weapons. Arya held Jonas's hand for a moment. They learn faces, she said. They learn what matters. Jonas nodded. He turned the radio dial and hummed the lullaby softly into the static. The town followed him in whispers and small songs. The envoy's screen glowed. It sent one last message before it folded into nothing: we collect patterns. You create patterns in reply. The night fell with a hard edge. The town lit small fires and guarded the pier. People stayed close. Some prayed. Some fixed nets. Some held children and counted their breaths. The observers had changed the test. Now they used kindness and photos. Now they asked what should not be given. Arya knew the danger had grown. The observers would learn how love could be used as information. She knew they had to hide more than parts and songs. They had to hide their past. The last image the town saw before sleep was the photograph on the envoy's screen, the young man with the crooked smile and the note beneath it: we keep records. Arya closed her eyes and thought of the meeting the observers might call next. She thought of a place where faces were judged and rules were made. She listened to the lullaby in her head and planned how to make the next answer harder to read. The game had changed. The observers had learned a new tool. Humans would have to change again. The morning after the port, the town smelled of smoke and wet cloth. People moved slowly. They had little sleep. The envoy's photograph sat in every mind like a small stone. It hurt to think of it. It hurt more to know the observers could reach into memory. Arya walked the lanes and watched faces. She saw children who kept looking at old toys. She saw mothers who checked names twice. Stories were seeds in people. Now those seeds could be pulled up and watched. That thought made her hands cold. Leela worked in the library where the team kept its maps. She read old letters and old songs. She found stories that people told to hold their courage. She hid some of them in new books. She taught Jonas and a small group how to change a story's shape. Change the end, she said. Add a small lie. Let it sound true. The plan was strange. It felt wrong. But the observers treated memory like data. If humans gave false files, maybe the observers would read the wrong map. Jonas loved machines. He also loved puzzles. He cut the lullaby into small pieces and mixed those pieces into different songs. He taught kids to hum parts of it when they tied ropes. He showed them how a pause could mean one thing to a human and another to a machine. He worked late and made small lists. The lists looked like nonsense until someone read them with the right ear. The observers tested schools next. A bright light folded into a classroom. The children screamed and then saw a war that had never happened. Dust and smoke filled the air even when the room was still. Children cried for fathers who were not gone. Mothers wept at the memory. The observers measured grief and watched how fast a group turned to anger or to silence. Arya's stomach clenched. She knew the observers were building a map of feeling. They wanted to know how much fear would stop a city. They wanted numbers. Arya's answer would not be numbers. Leela and Jonas made a new kind of story. They wrote a small myth about a fisherman who always brought back shells but never answered direct questions. They planted the myth in a market and in a school play. They taught the actors to add a pause in the middle of the line, a pause that matched the lullaby. The pause was a trap. It made the observers wait for a pattern that would not come. At the same time, they built a false archive. They copied old photographs and made new captions. They painted a mural that showed a war with steel beasts that never existed. They spread the things through radio and through gossip. The team watched how the observers read these gifts. The observers counted, cross-checked, and rewired. The observers grew bolder. They sent an illusion of a lost sister walking into a market and then asked a man about her. People saw images of a boy who had never left and began to remember him. The illusion left the town with a silence like a closed door. The observers logged the reaction and marked a small increase in their charts. Arya knew that humans could not only plant lies. They must also plant truth in new ways. Truth had weight. It could anchor people when tricks came. So the team taught people how to hold a story together. They taught them to sing the real lullaby in secret and the false lullaby on the square. The false lullaby confused the machines. The true lullaby kept hearts steady. One night the team planned a great public show. They called it the Market of Many Songs. People came from near towns. Musicians performed old songs. Actors told tales that mixed fact and fiction. Leela stood on a crate and read a story about a harvest saved by a trick. The crowd laughed and cried in the right places. The observers watched and logged how people moved together. The show was a bait. It was also a shield. If the observers read the crowd, they would find the wrong story. They would think they understood patterns of trust and grief. But the team had layered meanings inside meanings. A child who laughed at a puppet might hold a secret signal in their laugh. An old woman who cried might be masking a pause that told Jonas what to do next. The plan worked. For weeks the observers sent the wrong replies. Their probes returned false data. Machines blinked and sent updates that made the observers adjust in the wrong direction. People learned to hide memory like a small coin in a shoe. Then the sky grew heavy. A ship like a dark sun moved into orbit. It was larger than any observer craft. It did not test with quick lights. It opened a small breach above the city and dropped a box that fell through air like a black seed. The city watched the box fall. It landed in a field outside the town and made a small crater. Dust rose. Children ran and then stopped. The observers' smaller drones circled the site and hummed. A low voice from space said nothing. Its silence was loud. Arya's team did not touch the box. They watched from the library and waited for the teams in white suits. The council would decide. The observers wrote notes on glass screens. People gathered at safe distance. Even the ones who wanted answers felt fear. Jonas felt something in his bones. The box was different. It hummed with a pattern that fit no song they knew. It had colds and half-beats, like a language trying to remember itself. Leela took an old cloth and covered her mouth. She thought of the myths they had made and of the true lullaby that kept mothers sane. Arya looked at the dark ship and thought of the map the box might hold. She thought of the star systems the observers had searched. She thought of rules and who made them. The city was a web of true memories and well-made lies now. The observers could read only what they were shown. The box was unkind and patient. It kept its secret like a locked mouth. The observers wrote one last line on their screens, "New vector detected." Arya felt the hush of a new test. This one would not be in a school or a dock. It would be a question asked far beyond their sky. The box might be a message. It might be a challenge. The night closed in with a feeling like a held breath. People hummed the lullaby with shaky voices. The city waited for the first answer. They buried the box where the grass bent and the earth smelled old. People stood far back. The probe drones circled like gray flies. The council sent a small team in white suits. They moved with careful steps. They opened the box and found a shard of metal the color of storm light. It was small and wrong. It had lines that looked like writing but were not letters. It hummed with a slow pulse. Arya watched the shard in a glass case. Her hands were folded. She did not trust quick answers. She had seen machines that gave easy solutions and left hard costs. The council argued in whispers. A faction wanted to hand the shard to the observers in trade for safety. Another wanted to hide it and study it. Some men in the crowd said the shard could buy food. Others said it could buy death. Leela leaned close to the glass. She felt the shard like a cold stone in her chest. She thought of old stories about lost machines that changed rivers and suns. She wanted to believe it was a relic. Jonas touched the case with a gloved finger and heard a small sound inside his head. It was not a voice. It was a pattern. He did not tell anyone at once. The council voted to move the shard to the old facility under the city. It had thick walls and a door that had not been used in years. They said safety. They meant control. Arya rode in the convoy and watched the shard like a sleeping animal. Samir followed with a small crew to guard the moves. People lined the road and held up lights. Some cheered. Some threw stones at the convoy. Fear and hope sat side by side on the streets. At the facility the shard sat on a lift in a small room. Scientists from the council in clean coats put instruments around it. They wanted numbers and tests. Jonas asked for time alone with just a candle and a small reader he had made. The council did not like the request. They agreed because Jonas had a way with machines and because Arya asked with her steady voice. Jonas worked by the candle and the reader. He placed a tiny coil near the shard and watched lights on his panel. The shard answered with a rhythm that matched no machine he knew. He hummed the lullaby without meaning to. The shard's light blinked with the same rise and fall. Jonas smiled and felt a worry at the same time. He called Leela and Arya. He said, "It listens like us." Arya remembered the lullaby and the foghorns. She remembered the way small patterns made the observers trip. She did not like the idea of playing with a thing that answered songs. But she also knew the shard could be a way to bend the tests. If humans could learn its rule, they could change the game. They decided to try a small test. The room was empty. The council sent 2 men and kept the rest waiting outside. Jonas connected the shard to a frame he made from old radio parts. He fed it the lullaby in a strange rhythm. Leela told a short false story while Jonas made the pauses. The shard pulsed and then hummed a tone like glass struck softly. Outside, a small observer probe hovered. It read the lift and sent a beam down to watch the machines. The shard answered with a quick flash. The probe's lights flared and then went dim. Its sensors blinked and gave a wrong red to the ship above. For minutes the probe could not see clearly. The ship sent orders and the orders came back confused. The test worked. The shard had the power to twist their sensors. The room leapt with quiet triumph. The council men wrote notes with fast hands. Some smiled like children who found a new toy. Arya locked her jaw. She knew the taste of power. She also knew the smell of danger. News moved like a slow wind. Observers marked the anomaly and sent a stern message, "Stop." The words were ink-cold and clear. They promised a quarantine if humans did more than watch. They said they would not let any species use such things without oversight. The message felt like a hand coming down. At night, voices rose in the city. One group said give the shard to save people. Another said hide it and learn. A man named Hazar, with money and a narrow smile, offered the council a secret deal. He said he could move the shard to a safe buyer for food and weapons. He spoke of trading power for peace. People listened because hunger is a loud thing. Arya met Leela in the library after the meeting. They lit a candle and spoke in low voices. If we give it away, Leela said, they will study it and we will learn nothing. We will be a footnote. Arya nodded. If we keep it, we will paint a target. She rubbed her forehead. Either way, someone will hurt. Jonas stood by the window and looked at the shard in his mind. He had an idea and it frightened him. The shard can hide, he said. It changed the probe for a time. Maybe it can send one pulse far away. Maybe it can call something. Layla's hand went cold at the thought. Call what? Jonas did not answer at once. He thought of old maps and of deep space routes the observers had searched. He thought of rules and judges. He thought of a thing that might care about broken promises. He said, I do not know. But the shard answered like it knew a language older than theirs. That night the team made a choice. They would not sell the shard. They would hide it in a place only a few knew. They told only 5 people. They placed the shard in a small metal chest and took it through the city in the dark. People slept on roofs and held knives at their sides. Drones passed like slow insect lights over the alleys. They buried the chest in an old mortar room under the library. The room had thick stone and a door that fit like a closed eye. They wrapped the shard in cloth and put a small hymn under it. They sealed the door and marked the place with a small carved sign only they could read. When they left, the shard hummed once inside the earth. The hum was not loud but it traveled like an echo. Far above, on a black screen in an observer ship, a new symbol blinked. A long line of data unfurled. The observers wrote 2 words and stopped, external response. Arya felt that the world had widened. The shard had done more than blind a probe for minutes. It had sent something like a name into the dark. The observers were afraid now of what might come. The council feared what would happen next. Hazar muttered curses. The streets hummed with rumor. In the quiet after the burial, Jonas sat and listened to the lullaby in his head. He thought he heard another sound beneath it. It was a slow answer from very far away. It was not in any language he knew. It sounded like law and like a bell. Arya looked at the night sky and breathed out. She felt small and big at once. The shard slept under stone. The observers watched. Something else moved in the shadows between stars. The game had changed again. The sky had changed. Nights were no longer safe places to sleep. Lights moved above like slow ships. People everywhere watched the stars and counted breaths. The shard lay under stone and song. The observers had marked the city as a place of interest. The new ship had answered the shard's pulse. Now it moved where rules were made. Arya stood before the council in a room that smelled of dust and coffee. The council's faces were tired. Some wanted peace by giving away the shard. Some wanted power. Arya looked at them all and felt the weight of the city in her chest. She remembered a child's laugh, Rosa's bread, Samir's boat. She thought of the lullaby that had started it all. The screen in the room brightened. A slow voice spoke in many tones at once. The ship had come close now. It did not shine. It loomed like a sealed gate. The voice said words that felt hard and old, though no one in the room knew the language. The observers translated clumsy fragments: violation. Council, assemble. The message named the observers as the first offenders. It spoke of a law older than the observers' tests. The unknown ship did not speak like the envoys. It did not ask questions. It named facts. It said the observers had broken a rule that all watchers must follow: no tests without consent. The translation made people gasp. The observers on their screens wrote fast. Their sky lights dimmed in a slow rhythm. A meeting was declared for a place far from Earth. A neutral point between stars. Everyone who wanted to judge or to answer would go. The date was set for 3 months from that day. The unknown ship did not threaten. It offered a chance. It gave terms: bring proof, bring voices, bring a rule. The room felt hollow and alive at once. The council argued. Some said do not go. Meeting with strangers in deep space was dangerous. Others said staying silent would be worse. Hazar whispered about selling the shard before the meeting. He said they could use the money to buy food and leave the talks to others. People in the hall spat when he said it. The city had suffered too much for easy bargains. Arya spoke last. Her voice was quiet but it held. She did not speak for a faction. She spoke for the people who fixed roofs, for children who hummed lullabies, for Samir who had given his boat. We will go, she said. Not as victims. Not as bargains. We will go as a voice. We will tell them our rule. The council agreed. They named Arya leader of the small crew. She chose Jonas, Leela, and Samir. They chose a pilot who had not left Earth but could read stars like maps. They chose a woman from the market who knew songs from many towns. 5 people and a small ship would go to speak for a planet of billions. The days before the journey were full of small things. People gave what they could. Rosa baked bread and pressed it into bags. A child made a charm and gave it to Arya. Jonas worked on the transmitter. He had an idea. If the observers read patterns, then humans could send one that could not be read as data only. They would send a rule in many forms at once: song, law, story, and sound. It would be a rule made from human things so that the watchers could not claim it was only numbers. They called the broadcast the rule song. Jonas built a small device that could sing and speak at once. Leela wrote the rule in simple lines. They practiced until the words felt like muscle. The rule was short and plain: no tests without consent. They added meaning to it by telling the story of the child who had never returned. They gave the rule music that made people remember home. On the night before the departure, the city gathered on the hill where Arya had once watched the sky. Fires lit faces. People hummed the lullaby and the rule song together. It sounded strange and beautiful. It felt like a hand reaching across the dark. Some wept. Some laughed. Arya held Jonas's arm and felt a small, steady fear. They were about to speak for everyone. The small ship that would carry them was not much. It had a patched hull and a curved glass window. It had an engine that coughed and then purred when coaxed. The observers watched the launch with interest. The unknown ship remained in slow orbit like a judge waiting in silence. When they reached high space and the small ship cut free of Earth's pull, Arya looked back and saw the planet. It was small and fragile like a coin. Voices from the city came through the radio in small bursts: songs, names, the lullaby. Jonas fed the rule song into the shard's echo. The buried shard could not leave Earth, but it had answered once. Jonas hoped the signal would carry in ways the observers could not unmake. They sent the rule song as music, as speech, as a map of stories, and as raw pulses. They wrapped the rule in human things: a farmer's handprint, a child's sketch, a woman's hymn. The broadcast moved out into the dark. It was not loud. It was honest. The observers listened. Their screens registered many things and tried to name them. The unknown ship received the broadcast and held it like a scale. For long seconds nothing changed. Then the ship sent a line: rule received. The voice was old and slow. It did not say whether it would be followed. It said something else. It said that the meeting would decide. It said that Earth would have a seat. Relief and fear mixed in the crew's chests. They had done the hard thing. They had made a law and put it into the sky. Now they would go to a place where many could speak and where rules could be read aloud. As the small ship moved toward the meeting point, Arya made a list. Names to speak. Proof to show. Stories to tell. She folded Layla's lines and put them in her pocket. She held the charm the child had given her and thought of the lullaby. Far below, the city watched the light that left them. People stood in doorways and hummed. The observers watched and adjusted. Hazar cursed and made plans that would not help. The unknown ship moved like a slow finger pointing to a future no one could yet name. At the meeting, they would read rules where no one could easily lie. They would show how humans lived and what they would not give. Arya felt small and very wide. She thought of tests and lullabies and shards under stone. She thought of voices that once sounded like games and now sounded like law. She tightened her fist around the charm and looked toward the black road ahead. The rules had been changed by a song. Now the world would travel to a table where those rules would be read aloud. The next step would be a place with many eyes. No one could hide there. They tested humans. Humans had answered. Now the rules would be read where no one could lie.